This is Benedict Forsyth, bringing you the latest TRIAC recordings of 1873, reporting the news in even these darkest of times. I am speaking to you once again from our mobile ethergram broadcast unit deep in the heart of the Imperial Eastern Union territory. I am sorry to say, however, that the IEU Propaganda and Information Authority has deemed our broadcast, for now, to be unsuitable for transmission. The sensitive nature of the civil war at this juncture has prompted the ruling hierarchy to stop all correspondence out of the nation. As a result, I am forced to disrupt our regular program. This will not, however, silence the Chronicle, and in their place, I would like to play a pair of interviews that I recorded with two redoubtable women who share very forthright views and opinions on the various topics that we discussed. The first is with one of the most reputed and gifted investigators in the Commonwealth today. Recorded just after the latest excursion of Lord Grey's cell in the FAU, I was lucky enough to whisk Mrs. Rosemary Arkwright away for a brief interview before she left for the beginning of another intrepid case, which, if we are lucky, we may get her to share some details on. Mrs. Arkwright, welcome to the Chronicle.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, no, please call me Benedict, it's fine.
Benedict.
Now, there are a number of questions that could come to mind when dealing with someone of your calibre of investigation, but obviously your previous investigations are things that we would love to hear about. I mean, there's this question of Archibald Kensington we mentioned, this blackguard. Could you elaborate on that?
Oh, yes, Mr. Kensington. He was a little bit of a toe rag, I'm afraid. He was embezzling war bonds and a bit of a traitor to the Commonwealth, so obviously he had to be reported and followed up and handed in. And of course, quite rightly you did so, and well done to you, and obviously you were commended by the Admiralty for that, I believe. So, I mean, we talk about the Admiralty. Work for the Admiralty, what is that like? I mean, does that an interesting experience? Can you elaborate on how that would be? Or? It's obviously a very patriotic duty to serve your nation and the Admiralty, and a pleasure to do so and bring to account those who would commit crimes against the state.
Well, quite,
nothing worse than the traitor, in my opinion.
Absolutely. No, I can hardly agree. We at the Chronicle do not condone traitors at all, obviously.
Glad to hear it.
Now, moving on, may I call you Rosemary?
Of course you can,
That's
Benedict.
Right, thank you. Spring Hill Jack, something that I've always been fascinated in. One of your more famous cases. How did that transpire? Tell me about that case. I'm fascinated.
It was excuse me, a case like any other. I was contracted by a client, as one of several agencies were, to look into the matter. Yes. I did my investigations, I reported my findings back, and that was my involvement. Client confidentiality means I am unable to give you any further details, I'm afraid. I'm sure you understand.
No, that's fine. I thought we'd come up against client confidentiality eventually. It was quite early on in the interview, but okay, no, that's fine. We can work around it. But very interesting case. Obviously successful to a part. I believe that was never solved, or is it an unsolved case, or is it still ongoing, or did you come to an end?
As reported in your own broadcast, I think you'll find you reported at the time that he had moved on. The attacks stopped in New London.
Very well. Okay, Rosemary. Let's move on to something.
Would you like any more details on your broadcast, Benedict?
No, that's fine. We'll move moving swiftly on. Okay. Moving on from cases now, Rosemary. Let's talk about the TRIAC cell. Let's talk about your role within that cell. And what's it like to work within the club. We very rarely get chances to talk to actual TRIAC agents, them being so busy, obviously, all the time. How does that sit with you? What is being a TRIAC agent about to you?
It's about an opportunity to work with other TRIAC agents and work on ways of dealing with and beating the Martian threat, which is obviously main objective.
Well, it should be the most important thing, obviously. The Martian threat is the biggest problem. It doesn't seem in this day and age that there are other problems that arise which seem to be getting in the way of that, but maybe more on that later. Thank you very much for that. Now Obviously, moving on from that, you've been on a number of excursions with Lord Grey's cell now. Obviously, the Prussian Oktoberfest antics seemed to were very successful. How did that end up? I mean, I believe Anti and Rage were involved in that at the end, and we've heard a lot about these over the recent months. Now,
Yes.
I mean, do we consider those still to be a major threat, more even so than the Martians?
I wouldn't have said they were a greater threat than the Martians. They are existing, and I'm sure investigations are underway to look into more detail on those organisations. But the Martians remain the single biggest threat to the planet.
Yes, indeed. I believe Anti is led by one Max Reinhardt, actually an old TRIAC agent, I believe. Any comment on that? Do we have any more that you can elaborate on that?
Mr. Reinhardt, who I did meet in Prussia, he came into the building to talk with Lord Grey. He drinks port, is about all I can say on him, I think.
Well, indeed. Now, moving on to the third excursion of the cell that Lord Grey has put together. Very recently, obviously, you've only just come back from the FAU. What was that experience like? Tell us about the what was going on inside that the Crimson Gargantuan monstrosity, as it's been coined.
Interesting experience indeed. It had formed a big ring around Norfolk, and we were placed inside to deal with. The mission was successful. The creature was dealt with and has been removed.
Well, from obviously I was there from the outside, obviously reporting, but from our view, from what we saw at the end, somewhere late Sunday afternoon, the creature just simply vanished and left Norfolk obviously open to FAU forces to move in. Can you elaborate on what happened there?
I'm sure I could. However, the wisdom of revealing some of that on an open forum like this wouldn't seem to be great.
Very well, Rosemary. Okay, keeping your cards very close to your chest as always, I understand completely. Maybe we can get some more comment on that later on. Now, Rosemary, the next question I'd like to ask is obviously regarding the civil war in the IEU, which is looming over us all. How is this going to affect our ability to attack and defend ourselves against the Martians if we are just fighting amongst ourselves?
That is a very good question, Benedict, and the point has been discussed. Our main focus at the moment really should be the defence of our planet and the battle against the Martians, and that is what TRIAC is doing.
Yes.
And we are doing with TRIAC. The situation in the IEU is incredibly unfortunate and driven by actions within the IEU, which has caused these sides to form, and the conflict is as a result of those actions.
Now, when you say sides, we are talking about the Mongol Alliance on one side, which is these the Mongols from the steppes, and obviously these renegade Tenko, they're calling them, these Ronin, and then the Royal Court on the other side, which is the Empress and her forces and the Imperial Army. Yes?
I believe so, yes. So the poisoning was, I believe, the cause of the antagonism.
Yes.
That needs to be resolved. That needs to be resolved by the country itself.
I see.
The rest of us, meanwhile, obviously must continue to work on the Martian threat.
Indeed. Now, well, as I understand it, from the last messages that we had, TRIAC was going to be taking specifically a stance of humanitarian aid only in regards to the Civil War. Now, I assume that runs concurrently with the TRIAC Accords and what you can and cannot do within a member nation if they are having a civil war. It's a very interesting situation because I don't think we have ever had this before since the Accords had been written and TRIAC existed. So I was very interested to hear that obviously the humanitarian aid would be given, but was there any conversation regarding TRIAC actually getting involved from your part, or was this purely something which was driven by the laws and the rules of the club?
I was not involved in any discussions about whether TRIAC should be involved, and it's not TRIAC's role to be involved in the internal affairs of a nation.
No,
it's my understanding, but then you'd have to talk to Lord Grey about that.
Well, maybe I will. Maybe we will one day be able to get him into the studio and then may well have a conversation with the gentleman myself. Now,
I'm sure he'd be happy to.
Yes, indeed. Maybe between excursions. Now, on Lord Grey, I mean, you obviously must have more access to Lord Grey than most, being in his cell. What's he like? Is he an easy man to speak to? Does he any foibles that we should know about?
He's very easy to speak to, and I have no reason to think that there is any scandal, which I believe is what you're fishing for, or anything scurrilous to report.
Rosemary,
there for
scandal
you.
is not a word that I would have used, but there you go.
Really?
No,
you do surprise me.
Well, thank you very much for that anyway. Moving swiftly on from there, I mean, we have a number of things that we could talk about, but what I would like to do is just dip in slightly to some of your some more personal questions, if I may. I mean,
I wondered when we'd reach that
well,
point.
you are Rosemary Arkwright, and there is another member of the TRIAC cell, Basil.
I thought you were going to mention young Jasper. He's obviously no relation.
No, Jasper, no relation. Obviously, yes, we've heard about this. We were somewhat of a confusion on that one in the Chronicle for some time. But now, talk to me about your estrangement with your husband. I mean, it must be
ex-husband.
I apologise, ex-husband. It must be quite hard to be in the same cell with someone who is effectively, we spoke earlier on, in regards to, shall we say, not so much enemies of the state, but certainly people who have joined the Concord are looked upon by the Commonwealth as well, let's be honest here, and we're going to use the word, traitors.
Yes, he is a traitor to the Commonwealth.
I see. And how does that serve and stand with you being in the same cell and him being a TRIAC agent as well, though?
I'm a TRIAC agent, and I will perform my duties as a TRIAC agent.
Well, yes, that's fair enough. Obviously, it's probably slightly unfair of me to ask the question, but you understand, I couldn't resist.
I understand completely why you asked, Benedict.
Right, okay, so, well, moving finally, I think we only have so much time here before you have to get off to your next case. Obviously, we've got an upcoming, it would normally be an excursion, but it seems that Lord Grey has decided to do something slightly differently this time, and he's called a summit of all nations, which is very interesting. It's not something that's happened before, and I believe a ball as well on the Friday of the excursion. So, what are your hopes for this? It's obviously a very political move, and there are a number of nations which will be attending, apart from obviously the major 7 or 8 now, even with through Scandinavia. Do we have any personal hopes or goals for this excursion?
I'm looking forward to talking and meeting lots of people and asking several questions and following up on several of my cases.
Ever the enigmatic answer, Rosemary. It's been very, very lovely to have you here today. I think we really should draw a close to it here now. Obviously, you have a number of things that you have to do. I am moving very swiftly from here to the IEU, and the Chronicle is going to be moving over very shortly with our broadcasts to that country to bring you anything we can from there. Thank you very much, Rosemary, for your time.
Thank you, Benedict. It's a pleasure.
Strong and redoubtable indeed, listeners. And now, our second recording. Following the recent movements in the world of finance, I thought it would be an interesting diversion from our usual broadcasts to dig deeper into the new developments that are happening in the giant of industry that is Raven Herald Industries. To that end, we have at the Chronicle secured an interview with Miss Felicity Winters, Chief Operating Officer of RHI and Head of Research and Development for the company. Mr. Herald is still unavailable for comment, and we understand that he has not been available since the last excursion of Lord Grey's TRIAC cell, and we hope that Miss Winters may be able to shed some light on this and many other questions that our listeners want answers to. Miss Winters, welcome to the Chronicle.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Miss Winters, the burning question of the day is, where is Aether Herald, and what is he doing?
That is a very good question. To say the least is we do not know where Ethan is at the moment.
Oh, really?
I last saw him as we were leaving in Norfolk last time, and we left. He then said he had important other business to attend to, and as I am currently in charge of Raven Herald Industries, I thought it was best that I returned to our research development in New Richmond.
Oh, quite, okay. Well, we hope that Mr. Herald is found very soon. I'm assuming he's not in any trouble or any danger, but let's hope that is the case. Now, Miss Winters, these vaults that RHI are trying to find, Is this a personal project of Mr. Herald, or is this a fully endorsed RHI affair?
This is more or less a personal project of Ethan, although he is using the funds coming from RHI, which is a little bit annoying, to say the least, for me, because he is divulging all of this money that is supposed to be going to me. He owes me a lot of money right now. He owes a lot of our staff money as well.
I see. So there is there's some kind of some debt going on there.
Yes. There is a lot of debt. He owes me. He owes our staff. He needs to pay for the research that we have been doing. I am hoping that he will come and give me some money soon.
Well, I'm sure we all hope he returns very soon, safe and sound. So the Special Projects Division. We've seen more and more funds being diverted into this new area of the company. As head of research and development for RHI, are you concerned that this may affect your ability to run your department?
Oui, because I am not in charge of it. It has got nothing to do with me.
Oh, so you have nothing to do with the Special Projects Division?
No, he has told me nothing about it. The first I heard was when you reported on it.
I see. Oh, well, it's good to know we're at the point of the spear, so to speak.
Well, that is worrying that you know about something before I do, and I am supposed to be learning his company.
Ah, well, maybe I've opened a can of worms that maybe we should...
You have indeed opened a can of worms, and when I see Ethan, he will most likely be getting a slap or two.
Oh, I see. Well, yes, let's close that can of worms now and move swiftly on. So, we have seen more of you in the public eye recently, Felicity. May I call you Felicity?
No, you may call me Felicity.
What with Mr. Herald stepping back and devoting more time to his vault escapades, how are you settling into this new role? Are you getting the support you need?
It is an interesting role, to say the least, because originally I was just brought on to, develop his new weapons, which is fine. I can still do that. That's not a problem. However, with him taking on this escapade of the vaults, obviously me taking more over the role of making sure that everything else in the company works, it is very strenuous. I find myself having to drink more and more coffee every day.
Well, quite, yes. Okay, so let's move on. Are there any new developments you are working on that you can tell us about today? The public would love to know what new weapons and defences they can expect from RHI to fight the Martian threat.
All you need to know is that we are indeed working on things that can be used in against the Martian threat. I cannot tell you anything because that would break confidentiality secrets.
Yes, and the confidentiality agreement rears its ugly head, unfortunately. But I understand that, and obviously I would not want to divulge anything that
I would have to kill you afterwards anyway.
Oh, yes, well, quite, yes, indeed. So obviously, moving swiftly on from that, moving on from new weapons then, let's talk about the company's view on the current state of affairs in the IEU. I would like to ask, due to the nature of the business, what Raven Herald Industries' stance on the Civil War is. Will you be opening negotiations with either side to provide them with weapons?
The Civil War is a very unfortunate event. I would not wish that on any nation. It is not something that I like to see. However, should negotiations open up, then we will look into them, but we will not fund one side and not the other. That is not very fair.
I see. Surely war is good for business, though.
War is incredibly good for business, do not get me wrong. However, the war against the Martians is more profitable than a civil war.
Profitable, interesting. And more necessary, I would imagine.
Of course.
Indeed. Well, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid, Miss Winters. Thank you so much for your time, and on behalf of the Chronicle, we wish you luck, and we are sure that the path of the company is in good hands, while Mr. Herald is, shall we say, otherwise engaged.
Thank you very much for having me.
Interesting indeed. One wonders if this interview has opened more questions than we had to start with. But for now, that concludes our time on the air, listeners. We will continue to try to bring you news from the IEU when you are given permission to do so. But, for now, we have to come to the end of our allowed time. So once